A little girl told the Mafia boss you are my daddy while he stared at her single mom. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to the main characters. Emily Carter hadn't expected the knock at her door that evening. After another long day balancing her work as a waitress and taking care of her 5-year-old daughter Lily, she was just hoping for a quiet evening to relax. But when the doorbell rang, everything changed. She opened the door to see a tall man in a well-tailored suit standing in the hallway, flanked by two others who seemed out of place in this quiet neighborhood. The man's gaze was intense, his sharp features framed by dark hair, and his piercing eyes seemed to scan her with a quiet authority. He was someone important, someone who didn't belong here. "I'm Dominic Marino," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I need to talk to you." Emily blinked in confusion, her heart racing. She didn't know who this man was, but there was something in his eyes that made her feel as if the world was about to change in ways she couldn't understand. She stepped back instinctively, trying to close the door, but his hand shot out, stopping it with ease. "Please, just hear me out," he said, his voice softening, yet still carrying an undeniable command. Emily looked past him at the men who had followed him into her small apartment. They stood silently, their presence heavy and intimidating. She wasn't sure what kind of trouble this man had brought with him, but she could sense that he wasn't someone who could be easily dismissed. Dominic stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his gaze immediately flicking to Lily, who was standing by the couch, watching them with wide, curious eyes. It was then that Emily felt her unease deepen. She didn't know why, but the way he looked at her daughter made her instinctively protective. "You must be Emily," Dominic said, his voice a little softer now as he looked at her. "And this must be Lily." Emily nodded, her throat dry. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to hide the fear in her voice. Dominic smiled faintly, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I just want to talk," he said. "And I need you to understand that this is not a choice." Emily didn't know what he meant by that, but there was something about the way he spoke that made her nervous, a feeling that only grew stronger as he took a step closer. Lily, who had been quiet up until now, suddenly piped up in a small voice. "Are you my daddy?" she asked, her innocent question hanging in the air like a question that had been asked for years but never answered. Emily froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned to look at her daughter, her face pale with shock. But Dominic, instead of reacting in anger or confusion, stared at Lily with a kind of solemnity that made Emily's stomach churn. He didn't answer immediately, but instead, his gaze lingered on Lily, and then back to Emily. There was something in his eyes, something deeper than she could understand. "I'm not your daddy," Dominic finally said, his voice low, "but I will make sure you're safe." His words, though simple, sent a shiver down Emily's spine. As his gaze returned to hers, she felt the weight of his promise settle between them. Whatever this was, it was only just beginning. Emily stood frozen, her eyes locked on Dominic as her heart pounded in her chest. Lily's innocent question hung in the air, a question that seemed to shatter the stillness in the room. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The tension between them grew thick, a heaviness that Emily couldn't quite explain. She turned to her daughter, her face pale, hoping to somehow erase the question that had been asked. But Lily simply stared up at Dominic, her young eyes filled with curiosity, untainted by the world around her. Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She needed to protect Lily, keep her safe from whatever dark world this man represented. Dominic, on the other hand, watched them both with an unsettling calmness, his expression unreadable. Emily knew he wasn't just another stranger at the door. This was something more. "I'm not your daddy," Dominic said, his voice low and deliberate, his eyes not leaving Lily's face. "But I will make sure you're safe." The promise in his words was more than just a reassurance. It was a declaration of power, an unspoken guarantee that nothing in this world could harm them while he was around. But Emily wasn't sure if that was something she could trust. Dominic turned his attention to her now, his gaze softening for a brief moment. "You're in danger, Emily," he said quietly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "And you don't even realize it yet." Emily shook her head, trying to process the weight of his words. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've already told you. There are people looking for you," Dominic replied, his voice firm, though it carried a hint of something else, something colder. "People who won't stop until they get what they want. And they don't care who gets hurt along the way." Emily's mind raced. She had no idea who he was referring to, but something in his tone made her think he wasn't exaggerating. She had lived through enough hard times to recognize when someone was trying to intimidate her, but there was a raw honesty in Dominic's words that struck a chord deep within her. "You think this is just about money?" Dominic continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "This is about control, power, and you've just become a part of it." The silence that followed his words was suffocating. Emily didn't know how to respond. Her thoughts were a blur, racing from one possibility to the next, none of them making any sense. "Why are you telling me all this?" she finally asked, her voice shaky. Dominic took a slow step forward, and the air in the room seemed to change. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her feel both uncomfortable and oddly drawn to him at the same time. "Because you're already involved," he said, his voice low but clear. "Whether you want to be or not." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't part of whatever this was, but she knew deep down that he was right. She had no choice but to listen, to understand the danger that was closing in around them. "But you don't have to face this alone," Dominic said, his voice softening again. "I'll protect you and Lily, no matter what it takes." Emily stared at him, her mind spinning. She didn't know who Dominic Marino was, or what he wanted from her, but one thing was clear: she was in deeper than she had ever imagined. And there was no turning back. Dominic Marino's words hung in the air long after he spoke. Emily felt the weight of his presence in the room, his gaze unwavering as if he could see into the depths of her thoughts. She stood there, caught between fear and disbelief. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. This wasn't even close to the life she had fought so hard to build for Lily. But the man before her, Dominic Marino, wasn't just a stranger, and she couldn't dismiss him like one. There was a power in his presence, something that both repelled and attracted. She didn't want to be part of his world, but the reality was sinking in. "You're already involved," Dominic had said, and the truth of those words began to settle over her like a dark cloud. Emily shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't want to be involved in whatever this was. But when she looked down at Lily, playing quietly with her toys in the corner, a sharp pang of responsibility cut through her. Everything she had worked for was now at risk, not just for her, but for her daughter too. She couldn't run from this. "What do you want from me?" Emily asked, her voice quiet but firm. Dominic's eyes softened slightly, as though he understood the confusion and fear that was clouding her mind. "I want to help you," he said simply, almost too simply. "I don't need your help," Emily replied quickly, the words tumbling out before she could think. "You don't understand. You don't know anything about me, or what I've been through." Dominic didn't flinch at her outburst. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, his posture relaxed, as if he had all the time in the world to explain. "I know more than you think, Emily," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. "I know about your past. I know about your struggles. And I know that you're trying to protect your daughter." He paused, his gaze shifting to Lily for a moment before returning to Emily. "I've been watching. I'm not here to hurt you. But there are people who will." Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. The way he spoke, so matter-of-factly, made her uneasy. He wasn't just talking about debts or money. There was something darker in his words. "Who are these people?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper. "People who won't stop until they get what they want," he said, his voice low. "And they will come for you if you don't make the right choices." Emily swallowed hard. She had never felt so out of her depth in her life. But then, she thought of Lily again, and the weight of the responsibility she carried seemed to settle on her shoulders even heavier. "What choices?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic took a step closer to her, the air between them charged with a quiet intensity. "Stay close to me," he said softly. "Let me protect you and Lily. You won't have to worry about anyone coming after you. I will handle it." Emily looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception. But all she saw was a calm certainty. He wasn't lying. He believed every word he said. And as much as she wanted to refuse him, she knew she had no choice. "I don't know if I can trust you," Emily said, the doubt in her voice thick and heavy. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Dominic replied, his voice steady. "I'm asking you to trust that I'll keep you safe. You don't have to make any decisions now, but you need to understand that this is real." The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as Emily realized how much danger they were in. She had no idea who Dominic Marino was, but one thing was certain. He wasn't a man who made empty promises. "I'll think about it," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. "I'll be around," he said, turning to leave. "But remember, Emily, I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you." As he walked out, Emily closed the door behind him with shaking hands. She leaned against it, her heart racing. Her life was never going to be the same again. Emily couldn't shake off the conversation with Dominic, the weight of his presence lingering in the quiet of her apartment long after he had left. She glanced over at Lily, who was sitting on the floor, playing with her dolls, unaware of the storm that had just passed through their lives. Emily had always prided herself on being strong, on handling things on her own, but Dominic's words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder that she was no longer in control. As much as she wanted to believe she could keep Lily safe on her own, something in Dominic's eyes told her that was no longer an option. Over the next few days, Emily found herself looking over her shoulder more often, her sense of safety slipping away. She didn't know what Dominic's world was, but she knew that he wasn't the type of man who got involved in things without a reason, and his protection came at a cost, one she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. She tried to focus on her daily routine, work, taking care of Lily, and keeping their life as normal as possible. But every time she stepped outside, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. It was small things at first. The car that seemed to be parked across the street a little too often, the man who gave her a strange look when she picked up groceries, the uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach when she left the house in the mornings. Then, it started to escalate. One evening, as she walked home from work, she noticed a dark sedan parked across the street from her apartment. It had been there for hours, and the driver hadn't moved. She hesitated, her hand gripping the strap of her bag tightly as she tried to keep her composure. Her heart started to race, and she couldn't help but feel that it wasn't just a coincidence. She quickened her pace, turning into the alleyway beside her building, hoping to avoid the car and whatever, or whoever, was waiting in it. But as she reached the back door of the building, she froze. Dominic was standing there, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, watching her. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. "I thought you were supposed to keep us safe," she said, her voice tight with frustration. Dominic's gaze softened, and he straightened up, stepping toward her. "I am keeping you safe, Emily," he said, his voice steady. "But safety doesn't come without sacrifice. You can't keep running from this." Emily shook her head, her chest tightening. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for you to come into our lives and drag us into your world." Dominic's expression hardened for a moment, but then he stepped closer, his voice quieter. "You didn't have a choice, Emily. None of us do. The world is a dangerous place, and you're caught in the middle of it now." Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. She wanted to argue, to tell him that she could handle this on her own, but she knew deep down that she couldn't. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. Dominic studied her for a moment, his eyes searching hers as if weighing his next words. "Because I promised you protection," he said finally. "And when I make a promise, I keep it, no matter the cost." Emily felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, fear, and something else she couldn't quite place. She had never been one to rely on anyone, especially not a man like Dominic. But as she stood there, looking into his eyes, she couldn't deny the fact that he was right. There was no escaping this world now. "You're not leaving me, Emily," Dominic said, his voice low but firm. "You and Lily are mine to protect, and I will make sure nothing happens to you. Not while I'm here." Emily didn't know what to say to that. She had never felt so out of control in her life, so powerless. But as she stood there, feeling the weight of Dominic's words, she knew one thing for sure. Her life was no longer just hers to live. Emily woke up the next morning feeling a strange sense of dread hanging over her. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a film she couldn't turn off, and every time she closed her eyes, she could still see Dominic's gaze, his promise lingering in the air between them. He hadn't been wrong about one thing. There was no turning back. She couldn't deny that she was now part of something bigger, something dangerous, and as much as she hated it, she also knew she had no choice but to accept it. The morning passed in a blur of routine, getting Lily ready for school, making breakfast, trying to act normal. But normal was slipping through her fingers, and the weight of what Dominic had said the night before was never far from her thoughts. "You and Lily are mine to protect," he had said. Emily clenched her jaw. She had never wanted to rely on anyone, especially not a man like Dominic. She had worked hard to build her life, and now it was all unraveling. She wasn't used to feeling helpless, but every time she looked at Lily, she couldn't shake the thought that she was no longer in control. As the day went on, Emily couldn't shake the sense that Dominic was always close by, watching her, even when he wasn't physically there. She saw the same black sedan parked across the street again as she dropped Lily off at school, and though no one was in the car, she felt the tension tighten in her chest. She knew Dominic's men were following her, keeping an eye on her every move. But what unsettled her the most was the quiet certainty that they weren't just watching. They were waiting for something. She tried to push the thought from her mind as she went about her day, but it was impossible to ignore. Every time she stepped outside, she felt like someone was watching, waiting. She was used to feeling in control, to knowing what came next. But now, she couldn't even trust her own instincts. The world had shifted beneath her, and she was trying to hold onto the pieces before everything slipped away. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Emily sat alone in her small apartment, the silence pressing down on her. She needed to talk to Dominic, to figure out what was going on, but every time she thought about calling him, her hand hesitated. She didn't want to admit that she was tangled in his web, but the reality was undeniable. Her life had changed, and it had changed because of him. She finally reached for her phone and dialed the number he had given her. It rang once, twice, before he picked up. "Emily," he said, his voice calm, but with a note of something unreadable. "Are you all right?" She didn't know how to answer that. She wasn't sure if she was all right. "I'm fine," she said, the words coming out more weakly than she intended. "But I don't understand. Why are you doing this? Why are you involved in my life?" Dominic was silent for a moment, and for the first time, Emily heard something else in his voice, something close to regret. "I told you, Emily," he said slowly. "I'm here to protect you. You and Lily. And there's nothing I won't do to keep you both safe." She shook her head, even though he couldn't see her. "But why me? Why now? Why get involved with us?" Dominic's voice softened, the steel in it fading, replaced by something else, something almost compassionate. "Because you didn't have a choice," he said. "And neither did I. There are things happening, Emily, things that are bigger than both of us. And I can't let you face them alone." Emily closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. She didn't want to be part of this world, didn't want to be drawn into a life of secrets and dangers that she couldn't even begin to understand. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I know," Dominic replied softly, "but you're already in it. And now, it's my job to make sure you survive it." The words hit her harder than she expected. She didn't want to be in his world, but she was. She didn't want to need him, but she did. And as much as she hated to admit it, she realized that Dominic Marino was right. There was no way out now. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, the weight of it all sinking in. Dominic's voice was steady, unyielding. "You don't have to know. You just have to trust me. I'll take care of everything. You just have to let me." Emily swallowed hard. She didn't want to trust him. She didn't want to let him in. But as the silence stretched between them, she knew that, for better or worse, her life was now tied to his in a way she couldn't escape. Emily spent the next few days in a haze. The conversations with Dominic kept replaying in her mind, over and over again, like an unfinished song that she couldn't get out of her head. As much as she tried to push them aside, the reality of her situation crept in. She could no longer pretend that her life was still the same. She couldn't ignore the fact that Dominic wasn't going away, no matter how much she wished he would. And as much as she hated to admit it, a part of her knew that she needed him, or at least, the protection he promised. That was the hardest part, acknowledging that she was no longer in control of her own fate. She glanced over at Lily, who was coloring quietly at the kitchen table. The sight of her daughter's innocent face made everything feel even heavier. Lily deserved so much more than this. She deserved a normal life, a safe life, away from whatever world Dominic was trying to pull her into. But Emily couldn't escape it, no matter how hard she tried. Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Dominic. "Meet me at the usual place. I need to talk to you." Emily stared at the message for a long time, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She hadn't seen him since the night he had promised to protect her and Lily, but she couldn't ignore the pull to meet him. Something in his words made her feel as though something important was about to happen. She locked her phone and tucked it into her bag. Lily was already bundled up in her jacket, ready for school. She leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead. "I'll be back soon, sweetheart," Emily said softly, trying to sound as calm as possible. Lily smiled up at her, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. "Okay, Mommy," Lily said, her voice cheerful as she grabbed her backpack and headed for the door. Emily watched her leave, a wave of guilt washing over her. She had promised herself she would protect Lily from all of this. But here she was, walking right into the heart of it. The drive to the meeting spot was short, but every second felt like an eternity. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision she was making. She hadn't asked for any of this, but now it seemed like there was no turning back. When she arrived, she found Dominic already waiting by his sleek black car, his posture casual, but his eyes sharp as they locked onto hers. "You're here," he said, his voice low, almost approving. "I wasn't sure you would come." Emily said nothing at first, only nodded. She didn't know what to say. She still wasn't sure what this was all about. Dominic gestured for her to get in the car. "We need to talk," he said again, his tone more serious now. She hesitated, but finally slid into the passenger seat. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. The car was silent for a moment, as if both of them were waiting for the right words to come. "I don't know what you want from me, Dominic," Emily said finally, her voice tight with frustration. "I'm just trying to protect my daughter." Dominic's gaze softened as he turned to look at her. "I know," he said quietly, "but sometimes, in order to protect what matters, we have to face things that we'd rather avoid." He started the car, and they drove in silence for a while. The city passed by in a blur, the lights from the buildings reflecting off the wet pavement. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were headed into something far beyond what she had ever expected. Dominic's voice broke the silence. "I'm not asking you to trust me, Emily," he said, his tone careful. "But I'm asking you to let me help you. Let me keep you safe." She turned to look at him, searching his face for any hint of insincerity. But all she saw was a man who seemed resolute, a man who had made up his mind about something, and who would stop at nothing to see it through. "I don't know if I can do that," Emily said softly, her throat tightening. "I don't want to be part of this. This isn't my world." Dominic glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "It's not your world yet," he said. "But it will be, Emily. And when it is, you'll understand that everything I've done has been to protect you." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had no idea what kind of world she was stepping into, but something about Dominic's words made her feel like she was already a part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. The rest of the drive was quiet. Emily's mind raced with questions she didn't have answers for. She had always prided herself on being independent, on handling things on her own. But now, she was facing something bigger than herself, something she couldn't control, and that terrified her. The car pulled up to a secluded building on the edge of town, a large, unmarked warehouse that looked out of place in the otherwise quiet area. Dominic parked the car and turned to Emily. "This is where things get real," he said quietly. "Are you ready?" Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know if she was ready, but she knew there was no turning back now. Emily stepped out of the car, her heart racing as she followed Dominic toward the large warehouse. The cold evening air bit at her skin, and she shivered, not just from the chill, but from the nervous anticipation that twisted in her stomach. The building loomed ahead, its dark windows reflecting the faint glow of streetlights. Dominic walked ahead with his usual confidence, his posture relaxed but purposeful, as if this was just another part of his world. Emily hesitated, standing at the entrance for a moment, her breath shallow, trying to gather her thoughts. The weight of what Dominic had said to her before they arrived was still heavy on her mind. "This is where things get real," She wasn't sure what she expected, but she knew whatever was inside was not a world she could easily walk away from. Dominic glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "Are you coming, Emily?" he asked. His voice was calm, but the words carried an undeniable edge. She nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping forward. The door creaked open as they entered the warehouse. Inside, the space was vast and empty, with high ceilings and long shadows stretching across the floor. There were no signs of activity, but Emily could feel the tension in the air. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "I don't like it here," she muttered under her breath, her voice tight with unease. Dominic didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved deeper into the building, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. Emily followed reluctantly, her eyes scanning the space around her, trying to make sense of what was happening. She had never been in a place like this, and everything about it made her feel more out of place than ever. "It's safe here," Dominic finally said, his voice cutting through the silence. "No one knows you're here. No one will hurt you." Emily wanted to believe him, but the unease gnawing at her wouldn't go away. She glanced at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic stopped in front of a large metal door, pausing before turning to face her. "This is where my business runs," he said quietly, "and this is where you'll be safe." He opened the door, revealing a small office inside. There was a desk in the center of the room, papers scattered across it, and a few filing cabinets along the walls. It was a stark contrast to the cold emptiness of the warehouse. Dominic motioned for Emily to come inside. "Sit down," he said. "We need to talk." Emily stepped inside, her feet hesitant as she crossed the threshold. She sat in the chair across from Dominic, her eyes still darting around the room, taking in every detail, as if trying to find something familiar in this strange world. Dominic sat down at the desk, folding his hands in front of him, his gaze never leaving her. "You don't have to like it here," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But this is the only place where you and Lily will be safe." Emily clenched her fists in her lap, the frustration bubbling inside her. "I never asked for any of this," she said, her voice rising. "I don't want to be part of your world. I just want to protect my daughter." Dominic's expression softened, but there was still an underlying tension in his posture. "You don't have a choice, Emily," he said quietly. "Not anymore." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She wanted to argue, to fight against this fate she didn't choose, but deep down, she knew Dominic was right. There was no escaping this world. It was inescapable. She had already been dragged into it. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dominic's gaze never wavered as he looked at her. "Now, you learn to trust me," he said. "You stay here. You keep Lily safe. And you let me handle the rest." Emily wanted to scream, to fight back, but instead, she just nodded. She wasn't sure what trusting Dominic meant, or what that would look like. But one thing was certain. Her life was no longer her own. It had been taken from her, and now, all she could do was hold on and see where it took her. She glanced at Dominic one last time, the weight of everything they hadn't said hanging in the air between them. "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered. Dominic's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened just slightly. "You don't have to trust me yet, Emily," he said, his voice steady. "But you will." The finality in his words sent a shiver down her spine. She didn't know what that meant, but deep inside, she knew it was the beginning of something that she couldn't stop, no matter how hard she tried. Emily sat in the dimly lit office, the silence surrounding her almost suffocating. Dominic's words echoed in her mind. "You don't have a choice anymore." She hadn't wanted any of this. She hadn't asked to be involved in his world, but here she was, sitting in front of a man who held her life in his hands. The weight of the decision she had made settled heavily on her shoulders. There was no going back. She glanced at Dominic, who was standing by the desk, staring at her with that same unreadable expression. She didn't know what to think of him anymore. One moment, he was a man of promises, of protection, and the next, he was someone who held power over her daughter. Emily wanted to ask him 100 questions, to demand answers, but something stopped her. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the uncertainty of what would happen if she pushed too hard. Dominic stepped toward her, his presence filling the room. "You're safe here," he said quietly, his voice low and reassuring. "And you will be as long as you stay with me." Emily swallowed hard, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. Safe from what? She asked, her voice shaky. What exactly are we running from? Dominic didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, his gaze shifting outside, watching the city with a faraway look in his eyes. There are things you don't understand, Emily, he said finally. Things that you will never have to worry about if you stay by my side. But if you walk away, you risk everything. Emily felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to walk away. She didn't want to leave Lily in this uncertain world, but what choice did she have? She had already let Dominic into their lives, and now it seemed like there was no escaping him, no way out of the tangled web they were caught in. What happens next? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic turned to face her, his eyes locking onto hers. You stay here. You'll be safe, and you'll keep Lily safe. You'll have everything you need. His gaze softened slightly, though his expression remained serious. And when the time comes, I'll make sure you're ready. Emily frowned, trying to make sense of his words. Ready for what? She asked. Dominic's lips twitched into a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Ready to face what's coming, he said. There are bigger things at play here, Emily, and you're already involved, whether you like it or not. The finality in his tone made her heart race. She didn't want to be involved. She didn't want to be part of this world, this dangerous, unpredictable world that Dominic seemed to inhabit. But she already was, and she had to face it, whether she was ready or not. What do you want from me? Emily asked, her voice shaking slightly as she looked at him, trying to understand what role she played in all of this. Dominic took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. I don't want anything from you, Emily, he said softly. I'm just offering you a choice. A chance at safety. Emily's eyes darted to the door, her instincts screaming at her to leave, to run, to take Lily and disappear. But she couldn't. She had nowhere to go. Dominic's world was the only one she had left. And what if I don't trust you? She asked, her voice low, though she felt the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. Dominic studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. You don't have to trust me, he said quietly. Not yet. But you will. Eventually. His words were simple, but the weight behind them was clear. He was offering her something. Something that came with a price she couldn't yet understand. You're here now, Dominic continued, his voice calm, almost gentle. And that's all that matters. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Emily looked at him, unsure of how to respond. She wanted to fight, to resist, but something in Dominic's eyes told her that resistance was pointless. She had already been drawn into his world, and there was no turning back now. I'm not sure I'm ready for this, she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. You don't have to be ready, he said. You just have to stay with me. Everything else will fall into place. As he spoke, Emily felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for any of it. But in that moment, she knew she had no choice but to accept the path that had been laid out before her. She had to trust him, even if she didn't understand why. Even if she didn't fully believe in the promises he made. Okay, she said, her voice steady but quiet. I'll stay. Dominic's expression softened, and for the first time, Emily saw something more in his eyes. It wasn't just power. It was something else. Something she couldn't quite place. Good, he said, his voice low but approving. We'll make this work, Emily. For you. For Lily. Emily nodded, her heart still racing, but she couldn't deny the sense of finality in his words. She had made her choice. And now, there was no going back. Days passed slowly for Emily as she adjusted to her new life. A life she never imagined for herself. The promise of protection from Dominic weighed heavily on her, and though she tried to act as though everything was fine, the reality of her situation couldn't be ignored. Every time she looked at Lily, she saw a glimpse of the future, a future that felt uncertain, yet inextricably tied to Dominic's world. She had hoped the unease would fade, but it only grew stronger. The world she had been thrust into was vast, filled with secrets and shadows she didn't fully understand. Dominic had kept his distance since their agreement, appearing when necessary, but always maintaining an air of calm control. He had given her a room in one of his properties, far away from the chaos of her old life. And for the most part, Emily stayed to herself. She kept busy with her usual routine, taking care of Lily, making sure she was happy, trying to create a sense of normalcy in a world that no longer felt normal. But there were moments when Emily found herself thinking about the strange promises Dominic had made, about the danger he had warned her about. She tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The phone calls, the brief meetings with Dominic's associates, the constant feeling of being watched, it all reminded her that there was no escaping this life. One afternoon, as Emily was picking Lily up from school, she was surprised to see Dominic waiting by his car near the entrance. He was leaning against it, watching her as she approached. His presence was always so commanding, even in the most casual of moments. He seemed to be everywhere, a constant reminder that she was not truly free. "Emily," he said as she walked toward him, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone of something more. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" She hesitated for a second, then nodded, glancing down at Lily, who was pulling at her sleeve, eager to leave. "Sure," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What is it?" Dominic's gaze shifted briefly to Lily before he turned back to Emily. "I need to discuss something important with you. It's about the future, yours and Lily's." Emily's stomach tightened. She didn't like the sound of that. She had already made the decision to stay, to trust him, but it didn't mean she was comfortable with all of it. "What's going to happen now?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Dominic pushed himself off the car and took a step closer to her. "I've been making arrangements," he said, his voice low. "There are things coming, Emily. Things that require your full attention." She looked at him, trying to read his expression. "What kind of things?" she asked, her heart racing. Dominic's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he seemed to weigh his words carefully. "There are people who think they can still control the situation. People who won't stop until they get what they want. And they'll come after you if you don't make the right choices." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard the warnings before, but hearing them again made her realize the gravity of the situation. She had no idea what was coming, but she knew it was going to be more than she could handle alone. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear that crept up inside her. Dominic's expression softened, and for a brief moment, he almost looked like the man she had met days ago. Protective, kind even. "I want you to trust me," he said. "I've made sure you'll be safe, Emily. But now, you need to be ready. The people who are coming, they won't stop until they get what they want. And I can't be the only one fighting for you." Emily swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. She had made the decision to stay, to trust him, but she wasn't sure she was ready for what was coming next. She had thought she was just getting out of one dangerous world, but now, it seemed like she was being pulled deeper into something she couldn't control. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. Dominic's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You don't have to do it alone," he said softly. "I'm here, and I'll make sure you both are protected, no matter what." Emily nodded slowly, though doubt still lingered in her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But the truth was, she didn't know if she could ever fully let go of her fear, her need for control. As they stood there, the weight of their situation heavy between them, Emily realized one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back now.